Now we get to the pump, the heart. In AP1, we started on the first chapter talking about the cavities around the vital organs, and also the one, of course, around the heart, the pericardium. EM, remember, layer sheet, peri around, of course, cardi is heart. We said we have the parietal pericardium, that's going to be the outer, the thicker layer. They take all that abrasion, the wear and tear as the heart pumps and moves and brushes up against bones and muscles and nerves, blood vessels, etc. On the inside, we have the visceral pericardium. That's going to be a thin, delicate sheet. So much so, remember, not only consider the inner lining of the cavity, but also consider the outermost lining of the heart itself, and so also known as the epicardium, EM layer sheet around the heart. In between, we have the pericardial cavity filled with serous fluid that sloshes back and forth, a little bit of cushioning, but mostly there for lubrication as the heart beats and the water sloshes here and there. But the two membranes might come in contact because this is a very thin cavity, very small cavity, and so the two membranes might brush up against one another, and we don't want them to create a hole. Now, like the skeletal muscle, remember in AP1, skeletal muscle, we had the epimysium on the outside of the muscle, but outside of that, because the muscles are unique and then they move and they cause more wear and tear, we had that fascia, the extra thick layer of connective tissue added on to the outside to protect the skeletal muscle as it does contract and relax. The heart also contracts and relaxes, and so we had the same issue here. So on the outside of the cavity, we also have an extra thick layer of protective connective tissue, the fibrous pericardium. So outside the parietal pericardium, we'll have the fibrous pericardium. And with that, we'll have a lot of connective tissue, including fat. It's healthy to have, again, homeostasis, the right amount of fat right around your heart to give it cushioning, insulation, and a nearby energy supply. You don't want too little, and also you do not want too much, and that's usually the case these days. As I said, the walls of the heart, on the outside we have the epicardium, which is also the visceral pericardium, made up of epithelium, blood vessels, a little bit of fat, and also lymphatic to take away the nasties. Of course, the middle part is the myocardium, the cardiac muscle itself. And here we'll have Purkinje fibers, which specialize in cardiac muscle fibers. Now, remember, cardiac muscle are individual cells. And once nerves integrate into the muscle and cause a cell to contract, like a skeletal muscle, it'll fire off along the cell membrane. And actually, it's connected to the next cardiac muscle cell, and the next cardiac cell, and the next cardiac cell. And we get to ones that actually do more conducting of the signal than actually contracting. And so sometimes it's even kind of difficult, okay, is this cell contracting or just conducting a signal? There are groups of these cells that get activated, and that's called a syncytium. On the inside we have that endocardium, lining of epithelium. Now this one is not transparent. This one looks like cellophane wrapping. This one looks like wax paper. It's a little bit thicker and cloudier, and it has a lot of connective tissues, a lot of elastic and collagenous fibers connecting this to the myocardium on the inside. And extensions of this, like in your veins, will form valves, one-way doorways, allowing the blood to progress further as it's being pumped, and of course, hopefully not backwards. Under the high pressure of the heart, we have chordae tendineae that will connect cordinous tendons, okay, tendinous cords that will attach to the valves and hold them to the wall. In other words, the myocardium. Little projections, papillary muscles. Remember, papilla are finger-like little projections. So these little bulges of cardiac muscle come out, and when the heart is contracting, it will contract and pull on the cords, which help to anchor the valves under high pressure so they don't blow and allow for the blood to go backwards. Of course, the chambers of the heart, we have the two atria, or atrium individually. Those are the small, thin-walled upper chambers, as we see here. Now these are so thin walled that actually they will have a little reinforcement, and those are called the auricles. Remember from AP1, auricle was for your ear, the outer ear. Ancient Greeks thought this looked like a dog's ear flapping over. A double fold of that atrium, so it's actually 3 layers thick. But the outer 2 folds are called the auricle. And of course the atrium always receives blood from the veins coming back to the heart. Of course, one left, one right. Notice one side of the heart is blue, one side is red. Incoming blood comes in here, deoxygenated blood, pumps out, and when it comes back, of course, it's going to be oxygenated from the lungs and comes back red. The ventricular chambers, the 2 lower, they're thicker chambers because they have a lot more muscle. They're providing the blood pressure, the right side, of course, to send the blood to the lungs and part way back. And of course, the left ventricle, the largest one, in order to send what we call systemic everywhere but the lungs, to the top of your head, down to your big toe, and part way back. Always pumping out, of course, to arteries. The center dividing wall between that blue side and red side, that's called the septum. We have that between the atria and between the ventricles. The doorway which the blood passes from the atriums to the ventricles is called the atrioventricular orifice. And remember, that's regulated by a valve. Because of the septum in the middle, which really doesn't contract very much, and the larger muscle in the left versus the right, we get a groove off center of the heart, the interventricular sulcus, both on the front and the back, which you cannot see in this picture. But because of this, okay, and that will help you in orientation. That's a weird view of the heart. But you have one little groove on the front and one little groove on the back. That will show you the difference between the 2 ventricles. And of course the anatomy, which you have to identify, of course, in lab. The flow of the blood, we have blood returning, blue blood deoxygenated from the upper part of the body, the head, neck, arms, and upper chest, from the superior vena cava, which actually translates into upper big vein, and coming up from the most of the torso, lower torso, and of course also legs, the inferior vena cava, the lower big vein, and also that coming back from the coronary system itself, feeding the heart. All blue blood deoxygenated. It will enter into the right atrium, basically spill over, and make its way past the tricuspid valve, and called that because it has 3 flaps to it, into the right ventricle. When that pumps, it will pass through the pulmonary valve at the base of the pulmonary trunk. Pulmonary means, of course, it's going to the lungs. Trunk, there's just 1 blood vessel. Usually we talk about 2, left and right. Here we only have 1 large one. That's a trunk. Splits off into going to both lungs, the pulmonary arteries. Remember, always leading away. Still blue blood though, one exception. It will branch off to each lobe of each lung in the lobar arteries, and then enter into the lungs proper, where the capillaries, it starts picking up oxygen, so it starts turning purple, and eventually as it leaves, it's now red blood, oxygenated blood, now in the lobar veins, leaving each lobe. Culminates into the pulmonary veins, heading back to the heart, and will enter into the left atrium. Remember, again, that exception to the rule about red and blue. And the left atrium will pass by the bicuspid or the mitral valve. Bicuspid has 2 flaps. Mitral, an older term, into the left ventricle. When that pumps, of course, that bicuspid valve shuts, and so it goes through the aortic valve on its way to the aorta. And then what we call systemic, which is going to be upper torso, arms, well, to the heart, and also, of course, the lower body. Every place except for basically the lungs. Now, muscle usually contracts off of bone, as we talked about last semester with skeletal muscle. However, of course, there's no bone in the heart, but there's the next best thing. It does need something to stabilize it, especially for strong contractions like with skeletal muscle. Remember, it's striated, so it's strong. It has to be strong to create blood pressure. So it actually uses dense, regular, fibrous connective tissue, which remember is very tough but slightly flexible. Now this is at the proximal ends of your pulmonary trunk and your aorta. Notice any kind of garden hose. You have a 20, 30, 40, 50 foot garden hose and you use it year after year, where it usually springs a leak, where it gets a weak point, is going to be at the proximal end of the hose, not the distal end, the proximal, near to the faucet. As you go down the hose, you can have good pressure coming out of the faucet. If you have a 300-foot hose, it dribbles out the other end. You lose pressure as you go along. It's going to be the highest pressure when it first comes out. The newer, the better hose, it's a little bit more expensive, but the first 3 or 6 feet is going to have an extra thick coating on the outside to protect it from that high pressure, so it lasts longer. And your blood vessels are actually made very similarly. It has extra dense fibrous connective tissue in there to reinforce it where it has the highest pressure coming out of the heart. Also, those doorways, atrioventricular orifices where the valves are. The valves are very particular, like a doorway. You slam a door, it hits the edge of the door to hold it. If you take that edge of the door, it becomes a swing through door, doesn't it? You don't want that to happen. So just like your doorway has to keep its shape, so we always reinforce doorways so they don't change shape, your orifices here in the heart are also reinforced, but not with bone, but with dense fibrous connective tissue, almost the next best thing. So it decreases the dilation, of course, during high blood pressure. The supply of blood to the heart itself, that coronary system I mentioned, the coronary arteries. Now, you don't normally see this, but the first blood that comes out of the aorta actually goes to the heart. We usually pay more attention to that big aorta coming up and arching, and those first 3 major blood vessels coming off of it, of course, going to the arms and the all-important head and brain. And brings up a little bit of argument about, what the most important organ in the body is, and that's a whole other joke. But the brain needs blood. We gotta make certain it gets the blood. But if it doesn't, you can just pass out. But if your heart doesn't and it stops, you die. So the heart is going to actually be the priority. The first 2 branches off the aorta usually are underneath the auricle and underneath a bunch of fat, the right and left coronary arteries. These are going to come off at right angles, and for good reason. Now, of course, there's this whole system around the heart. The right will go to the posterior interventricular artery, so down that sulcus in the back, and also goes around the edge down the marginal artery, and the left goes circumflex around the main base underneath the atrium, the auricles, and between the atriums and the ventricles, and also branches off to the anterior interventricular artery down that anterior sulcus. Why it's built this way is the same way we build our roads. Again, we take after nature. You want to do things right, you want to make money, copy nature. If you're going down the highway and you're going, of course it says 75, so you're probably doing what, 90? So as you're going down 90 miles an hour, you can veer off onto the feeder road because it's basically like a Y. And you can very easily go off there, and even though it says 45, you can still keep going 60. Now, when people are coming downtown in Athens and you go to downtown, you don't have a Y to just veer off and keep doing 35, 40 miles an hour downtown. They make the intersection at 90 degrees because if you go too fast, you're going to overshoot your mark. And then you got to go around to get where you want to go. You have to slow down. That's what's happening here during systolic pressure, during high pressure. The blood is too high pressure. We don't want to easily go in these coronary arteries because very quickly we have to get the capillaries that are very thin, and there's too much pressure. We're going to blow those capillaries. You're going to have bleeding around the heart, and you're going to have a heart attack. We don't want that. We want to have lower blood pressure. So what happens is, it's made at 90 degrees angle. At systolic pressure, the pressure's too high, can't make this turn. It shoots past the coronary arteries. Now upon diastolic relaxation, the pressure drops and backflow comes in, and now it can make its way in here at the lower pressure and get down the capillaries, and it won't blow. And one of the few arteries actually branches off at a 90-degree angle. Most of yours are made to have nice, easy, continuous blood flow. But there's different circumstances here, and so you designed to go by that. Now on this diagram you don't see it very much, but there are what we call anastomosis, natural bypasses in the heart. And so some places you're more likely actually to get clogs in your heart than other places. Yeah, plaquing. And so those syncytiums I mentioned before, they can start lacking blood and oxygen, and so you have a heart attack. The larger ones, the major ones, the more of those you affect, the larger your heart attack is, the more likely you, of course, are to die. Some of these places you're more likely to get these, you have natural bypasses or detours around them. So you have minor heart attacks. And that's one reason why you hear sometimes somebody has a major heart attack, somebody has a minor heart attack. And here, of course, if you're going to have a bypass, you take out one of those extra veins, an anastomosis in your leg, and you're going to just loop around that blockage to go around, detour around the blockage. There's other methods. There are little balloons. They can put a probe all the way up in here and then just enlarge the balloon in a microsecond and push the plaque out of the way. Enzymes can dissolve it. They have little grinders that can grind it up. One of the interesting thing is that somebody found out in a study salamanders never die of heart attacks. They actually do eat sometimes fatty foods. Some bugs are particularly fatty, and yet they'll get clogged coronary arteries, but whenever their heart muscle starts lacking oxygen, it stimulates a hormone that actually grows a blood vessel around the blockage, which is really cool. And actually they're working on that, trying to design something like that in humans. So if you might have a heart attack, you're starting to have a heart attack, you take a pill or take an injection and you simply make your own bypass with no surgery. That'd be so cool. And of course, once the capillaries, the venous flow, cardiac veins flow into a cardiac sinus, which takes the blood back to the right atrium, and of course veins parallel the arteries again, like you saw in lab.